Welcome. I'm Sean Wilkerson, Innovation Development Program Manager here at the United States Patent and Trademark Office. I want to thank you for joining us today for the Women's Entrepreneurship Symposium. We're excited to have you here for the fourth in our series of discussions held every Wednesday in March celebrating Women's History Month. Before we start the panel, Investing in Innovation, I have a few housekeeping notes to go over. The agenda for today's program is in the inbox of everyone who registered for the program, but it can also be found on our website at www.uspto.gov. During the panel, we will be accepting questions for the panel. So if you'd like to send us your question, you can do so by emailing us at wes@uspto.gov. We'll do our best to get to all of your questions by the end of the panel, and if we don't, we will try and reach out to you after the program to make sure that we do answer your question. If for any reason you get disconnected during the program, you can log back in using the WebEx link that brought you here. If you missed a portion of today's program, or if you have to leave early, you can find the program on our website in just a few weeks at www.uspto.gov. If you're anxious to see the information again or see the portion that you missed, you can also go to our Facebook page, USPTO at Facebook, and find the video online. It will be available after the presentation today immediately, but if you'd like to watch it later, you can also find it on our website at www.uspto.gov. At this time, I'd like to ask our panel to please make sure their microphones are unmuted and their cameras are on. And I'd like to introduce you to our moderator for today's program, Hope Shimabuku, Director of USPTO's Texas Regional Office. Hope?
Thank you, Sean, and thank you for allowing me to moderate this very esteemed panel. I am super excited to be here as we're talking about a really important topic on investing in innovation. One of the things and the questions that I get asked a lot is that, okay, I have this wonderful idea and I have all of these products and services to sell, but how do I get the funding to be able to support the business that I have? And these women are leaders in the industry who are going to be able to answer that very important question. So I'm going to start off by introducing each one of the panel members here, and then let them talk a little bit about who they are and the organization that they are working for or they are representing. And I'm going to start with Elizabeth. Thank you so much for joining us. Elizabeth is the founder of an organization called SoGal Ventures. And so can you tell us a little bit about yourself and SoGal Ventures? And then give us a quick introduction on the differences between the different types of investment and funding mechanisms. Specifically, what's the difference between an angel investor and a venture capitalist?
Thanks so much, Hope. Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Galbett. I'm one of the managing partners of SoGal Ventures. We're an early stage venture capital firm that invests in companies that are building how the next generations live, work, and stay healthy. So that's consumer tech, health tech, and enterprise software. We invest in diverse founding teams. So all of our companies have at least one woman founder when we invest in them, but we invest in broad-based diversity. So everything across making sure the team has, diversity in gender, LGBTQ, immigrants, veterans, different races, socioeconomic backgrounds. This is really important because in venture capital, these groups are traditionally underrepresented in who gets funding. And that's really important, and why I'm sure all of you are on this call to figure out if something like venture capital or angel investing is right for your business. So as a venture capitalist and our firm, we invest anywhere between $100,000 and $1 million into an early stage company. And we're investing that on behalf of people who have invested in our fund. So we have investors ourselves, and when you're accepting venture capital, that's accepting kind of this pool of capital from many investors. On the other hand, angel investors are individuals who have created wealth in some way in their life that are investing their own personal capital into your company. Oftentimes at the really early stages, you might have actually angel investors in venture capitalists both coming in to fund your company. But something that's really important to sort of remember, venture capital isn't right for everyone. It's right for certain types of businesses that do want to be high growth and have their sights set on, growing a business between $100 million, $1 billion and beyond, and do want to grow the business with prioritizing high growth compared to things like profitability or sustainability. And typically they have some sort of underlying technology, IP, or business model that really makes sense when you're investing a lot of money into a company to grow very quickly. So it is the right fit for some businesses, but not for all businesses. I know it's really publicized a lot in the news as the only type of capital, or the most special type of capital, but there's so many other options. And I know all the panelists today will be talking through the different options, and I think it's really important as an entrepreneur to learn about all these different things, whether it's venture capital, angel financing, or some of the other things we'll talk about today.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. Our next guest is Ruth, who is the CEO of Crowdfunding Roadmap Incorporated. Can you also tell us a little bit about yourself and give us an overview of your organization? And then also tell us a little bit about the work that you have done legislatively to enable crowdfunding and why this is helpful, especially to a woman business owner.
Sure. Thank you, Hope. And thank you so much for having me today. I am one of the original pioneers of equity crowdfunding. I worked with a group of people who, during the last recession in 2008, we realized that there was no capital. It had all dried up, unlike this recession. And there was no PPP loans. There was nothing, basically, saving small businesses. And so we went to Congress with this idea. The original draft of this was called the Startup Exemption. And we spent 2 years walking the halls of Congress and speaking to different people. Actually, Whoopi Goldberg was one of our original supporters. Steve, the head of AOL, was one of our early supporters. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce came on board, and then eventually almost 400 congressmen, 2/3 of the Senate, and President Obama signed into law in the Jobs Act of 2012, this Title 34A6, which was the bill that I helped create. But we got Regulation A+, which is another form of crowdfunding, and we were able to also convert a Reg D offering to a 506C, which is another form of crowdfunding. So in the bill, there's 3 different kinds of crowdfunding that did not exist before. And what this means to all of you is that you can go to a funding portal, or you can deal with, if the company's dealing with a broker-dealer on these registered offerings, and you can, as an average American, not as a VC and not as an angel, you can invest in any of these companies. And this was not legal before. And we really feel like this is really where the conversation needs to be, because there's trillions of dollars sitting in the hands of 350 million Americans, and they don't understand the power they have in transforming the kinds of cities and communities that they want to live in with their dollars. And so we have launching later this year a platform called Rise Up Crowdfunding. And you can learn about it at riseupcrowdfunding.com. We're working on this project with the Coca-Cola Company and their head of supply diversity. And we are really trying to change the mindset of people who have spent their extra money on lottery tickets and on sports betting and gambling and just consuming things, purchasing things. And during this pandemic specifically, we have seen a lot of people come to the rescue on crowdfunding platforms and help save the small businesses in their community. So really excited about, having this conversation today, and thank you so much for having me.
All right, thank you, Ruth. Our next panelist is Natalie, who is the Assistant Administrator for the Office of Women's Business Ownership and Small Business Administration. Can you give us a little overview of yourself as well as the office that you are working for, and then specifically also talk a little bit about the kind of funding mechanisms that the government can provide, specifically the SBA, including SBIR and STTR grants?
Absolutely. So first, thank you all so much for having me. As was mentioned, my name is Natalie Madeira Cofield, and I'm the newly appointed Assistant Administrator leading the Office of Women's Business Ownership, which sits in the Office of Entrepreneurial Development at the Small Business Administration. Our office is really the voice for women business owners across the federal government, working to support entrepreneurship, enterprise, access to capital, access to contracts, and access to equity for women entrepreneurs. We are very proud to have created the largest expansion of our Women's Business Center program in the history of the Small Business Administration, when this year we actually brought on board another 20 centers, giving us a total of 135 women's business centers in 135 cities across the nation. And each year, these centers work with nearly 60,000 women, supporting them through their entrepreneurial ambitions and their entrepreneurial interests. With that being said, I think the Small Business Administration is and has become an agency that is top of mind for many people, particularly during the COVID pandemic. I am sure that folks have already heard of the PPP program, which is an access to capital opportunity given the COVID pandemic, as well as the economic disaster loan program that we have. I would like to make note that the PPP program is set to expire on May 31st, 2021. And if you have not applied and you are in need of funding to support your business, please go to SBA.gov and learn more about both the economic disaster and injury loan program, as well as the PPP program. With that being said, if this is not disaster related, SBA has a number of other financing opportunities that it uses through intermediaries and financial institutions across the country. As was just mentioned by one of our other panelists, the reality is that 99.95% of all businesses in the United States of America will not receive venture capital. And so if you are interested in scaling and growing your business, then obviously things like crowdfunding or seeking traditional financing is important to you. And so the Small Business Administration provides microloans through intermediaries of up to $50,000 for small businesses. The average loan size is about $13,000. They also have the 7A loan program, which can give you working capital up to $5 million. SBA also provides the 504 loan program, which can give you capital for fixed assets up to $5 million. And that's just a few of the traditional lending programs that we have. I also do want to mention, and I was remiss in mentioning this around the disaster recovery funding opportunities, that if you are working in the spaces of entertainment or in the performance industry, we are very proud to have launched the Shuttered Venues grant program, which will officially open on April 8th, providing $16.5 billion in federal relief to entrepreneurs who are in the entertainment, production, acting, performance industries. I encourage, again, you to take a look at that. But hope you asked me about specifically the SBIR program. And I think, again, when we think about the vast richness of what comes out of the Small Business Administration, and I just really want to say, SBA has so many programs that many people are not aware of. So many programs that are designed to empower the nation's most critical businesses, which are small businesses across our country. The Small Business Innovation Research and the Small Business Technology Transfer Program actually provides nearly 5,000 new awards each year, totaling about $4 billion. And it is possible for you to apply for funding through one of these particular programs by going to, and I know Hope you'll mention this later today when you share the resources, by going to the website to learn more about how to apply for either SBIC-backed investment companies for these particular programs to support startups that are creating initiatives around new technologies, new innovation, and new technology transfer. I do just want to also mention really quickly before I close that things that have been funded through the SBIR program include the Sonicare toothbrush, as well as the Roomba. So if you have ever had that little vacuum going around your house, one, you should be proud to know that that is a company that was backed by the hardworking folks at the Small Business Administration. But two, also know that that is a company that was founded by women entrepreneurs like the very folks that we have on the call here today. So I will close with that. And again, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Natalie, for that wonderful information. So our last panelist is Corrine, and she is the CEO of the Association of Women's Business Centers. So Corrine, welcome. Can you also give us a little bit of an overview of your organization as well as yourself, and then what kind of assistance do you provide to women business owners?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. At the Association of Women's Business Centers, we work directly in support of the same women's business centers that Natalie's office serves so well. And so we're so proud and excited to be working with Natalie as of March 1st and applaud her work and passion that we've seen in demonstration already. The Association of Women's Business Centers and we work each and every day to ignite opportunities for women who want to start and grow their businesses through the support of that network of 135 women's business centers across the country. And thanks to funding afforded through the CARES Act in 2020 and the record expansion of women's business centers that Natalie just mentioned, there are more women's business center resources available in communities across the country than ever before. And it's really no coincidence that women are breaking barriers and making their dreams come true right here, right now, during Women's History Month. And so it's the power of all of these partners, SBA, USPTO, and the synergy of organizations on this call today that are behind each and every one of these women-owned businesses. And likewise, women's business centers have resources to share in that regard. And so, you know, in 2020, we were able to demonstrate an increase of our impact by 22% over 2019, serving 82,000 plus clients, 70% of whom were women. So we're not turning anyone away, but we're definitely focused on women, socially and economically disadvantaged. 56% of our clients were minorities, you know, and they had a tremendous impact last year in terms of really inspiring business starts. We saw more than 30,000 business starts and businesses sustained throughout this pandemic period, which was up 30% from 2019. And women's business centers helped women businesses, most importantly for the theme of this panel today, leverage more than $362 million in capital. And that more than doubled the 2019 figures. So really, women's business centers are a tremendous resource. It's really just about, number one, knowing that they're out there. Before I joined the Association of Women's Business Centers, I'll be honest, I didn't even know that this resource existed. We're sort of a best kept secret. The program funding and the resources at the Women's Business Centers are directly channeled towards service delivery and not as much as we would like to see, you know, in creating awareness about the program. So it's stage opportunities like this one here today where we get to really amplify the message and just let people know you can go to our website at awbc.org. There's a WBC locator, and I know we provided that link through the panel resources. You could also go to sba.gov and find the same link, the same access to information. The fact is, every single state and Puerto Rico have women's business centers, with the exception of Alaska. So hopefully, maybe someday we'll actually be able to open one up again there soon. But there's more. Congress actually directed the Association of Women's Business Centers and America's SBDC to launch a website specifically for small businesses who are not necessarily even just struggling, just operating or considering starting up during this COVID pandemic period. And that website I also provided is covid-sb.org. Another great place to find local assistance providers and, most importantly, federal agency information that small businesses can use. USPTO, Department of Labor, Transportation, practically every federal agency has some sort of small business resource out there, and they're all being collected and easily archived and searchable at that covid-sb.org website. So it's my goal to really amplify the message for women's business centers and help business owners or aspiring entrepreneurs understand what happens when they walk in the door at a women's business center, which is, being greeted warmly, being told that their dream is important, and being instilled with the confidence they need to take the next step toward counseling, toward education and training, and then ideally access to capital. So those are the metrics that we're measured by: starting that business, sustaining that business, and then of course access to funding. So that's critical to our success, and we know critical to the message of this panel today.
Thank you, Corrine. So now let's move a little bit on to how to get educated on these different funds. I know that you broadly talked about, each one of you, the different things that your organization works on. But one of the important things that I believe that you touched on when we were in our organizational meeting is the importance of improving financial literacy for women and others who are starting their businesses. And so are there important steps that women can take to get educated and become more financially literate? And based on your experience, are there things that are missing when women are trying to pursue funding for their business? And I'm actually going to start with Corrine on this question, and then we'll move to our other panelists.
Well, I'm probably going to sound much like a broken record, because step number one is finding the Women's Business Center and finding your partner, finding your fan club, if you will, and the person who's willing to tell you, here's where your weak points are. Here's where you could use some training. There's really no single nugget of advice that's going to be the right answer for every single business owner out there. We all come to the table with different skills, different financial acumen, and a different understanding about how finance is really such an important lens that we can use to plan for, to judge, and to determine the success of our business. And so sometimes it might be, hey, we need to start back much earlier, kind of in the financial education pipeline. We might need to understand what a balance sheet is and how we can actually manipulate the outcome of the business by changing different things about the business and how that translates to the balance sheet, et cetera. And so, one of the critical outcomes of really perfect financial literacy education is knowing which kind of capital is going to be the right kind of capital for your business, not to mention making sound financial decisions in every other area. How many expenses can you really tolerate? How much revenue do you need to earn? How much money should I be taking out of the business as income? How much can I afford to pay employees? What should I charge for my products or my services? So really that financial literacy component, it's pretty much important in every aspect of the business. And it's really finding where are you weak and where can you sort of enter into that education stream at a point where you don't have to waste time. That's really the single thing we hear from small business owners is, yeah, I lack this skill. I need this training. I need better acumen in this financial area, but I don't have time to go take, an accounting course or understand all that there is to know about accounting. I just need to know this one specific thing. And that's where Women's Business Center kind of understands that small business need and can provide just the dose of education that small business needs.
Thanks, Corrine. And so, Elizabeth, do you have anything to add to that?
Definitely. So I think understanding your different financing options is really, really important. And one way you can also go about that is to talk to other entrepreneurs in your communities and learn about their experiences and how they went about their own financing journeys. We also run a nonprofit called the SoGal Foundation. We have 50 hyper-local chapters across 22 countries on 6 different continents, and these bring together women entrepreneurs and investors in these local communities so you can find your tribe. Having that fan club and also peer support group as a business owner is so important, and being able to utilize your network to understand different financing opportunities and mechanisms is really important as well. So if you want to see if there's a SoGal chapter in your local community, you can look at imsogal.com. We also have the opportunity to start SoGal chapters in new communities. So if you're interested in doing that, we provide financial support to create, a network of women entrepreneurs in your own local community. And we'd welcome folks on this call. If you don't see your city represented, please apply to be a chapter lead, and we're happy to support you and give you resources in your journey of building that local tribe of women business leaders. I think there's tons of resources online to learn about venture capital and angel investing. We actually, as a nonprofit, also train angel investors through a program called Fempire so that we can get more angel investors investing into their local communities, because that's really important as well. And I think some of the resources actually around being trained as an investor also help you as an entrepreneur think about how potential investors are looking and evaluating your business. There are certain metrics and different things that investors like myself as a venture capitalist look for when we're determining which businesses to invest in or not, and sort of seeing the other side of the table and understanding these things that range from financial metrics to sort of investor terms and legal terminology are really important as you're going on your financing journey. So you can be having the right conversations and also understanding those different levers of your business. So luckily there's so many resources out there, and I think finding sort of your tribe of individuals in your local community, which the Women's Business Centers also sound like an excellent resource to do so, is really important in helping determine the right type of financing. And I do want to say, usually from the businesses I've seen and funded, is people utilize multiple different types of financing for their success. One company in our portfolio is cancer immunology for animals biotech company, and they've been able to utilize everything from tax credits, NIH grants and loans from banks, venture capital financing, angel financing, self-funding and bootstrapping at their very beginnings. So as you are an entrepreneur, you'll probably utilize multiple different types of financing, especially as you grow. So learning about all these resources is an important step of your journey, because although one may not be right for you today, perhaps in a year or two, it is the right type of financing for you to go after as a business owner.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. And I'm going to move to Ruth to talk a little bit about the crowdfunding and how that has been particularly impactful for women. We also do have a question that has come in. And so just a reminder to our audience, if you do have a question, please feel free to send it to the email box that Sean had mentioned at the beginning of the program, and we will try to weave it in to our program. So Ruth, if you don't mind answering this question, or you can punt it to Natalie if you would like when she connects on this. The question is, do I need a business plan when I look for funding opportunities? And so if you can address that as well as crowdfunding, that would be fantastic. Thanks.
So there, there's a saying, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And that is the absolute perfect statement that applies to running a business. And it's not just what you would think of as a traditional business plan. There is planning, say, a timeline use of proceeds after you get the funding, right? How are you actually going to spend this money? Do you have a customer acquisition plan? That's another plan. So there's lots of pieces to this bigger word of the business plan. And you can kind of create those plans in small little chunks, so you don't have to look at this whole thing as this overwhelming business plan. And you can create this plan in anything that you feel comfortable in. You know, back in the day, and I'm talking like the .com day, people would have to write, you know, 100-page business plan. And it became this really big project that they would just spend an enormous amount of time on. And when you actually ask them the specific questions about that plan, they had no idea. They could not answer that plan. So it's not just about this formal business plan. It's really more about you owning a plan of action and understanding the timeline of that plan and understanding how that plan applies to the money that you will need to execute that plan and how the money will come in. And when the money comes in, what you'll do with it. So you really absolutely 1000% need a plan. Yeah. And then did you want me to speak about the other?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Okay. So when it comes to equity crowdfunding, there is a bunch of terminology that is new to the financial world. In fact, the word funding portal, which is the platform that you go to, was not a legal word or entity until the Jobs Act. It was coined a funding portal. And on the funding portal, lots of funding portals have glossaries where you can find a lot of terminology about financing. And I would recommend that people become familiar with that terminology because a lot of it's applicable to every kind of funding. In equity crowdfunding, in certain types of equity crowdfunding, you may need audited financial statements. So obviously, and you would have to have an accountant do that for you, but it would be important for you to understand what that means so that you get the right accountant to do that with you. And I'm sure the agencies that you all represent understand how to help somebody do that. There is obviously, you have to understand the valuation. That's another terminology, a financial terminology. So understanding the valuation, because if you're going to sell equity to the public, you have to decide how much equity you want to sell, and then you have to determine the value of that equity, and you have to have the due diligence behind that, and you have to be able to quantify that, and you have to be able, most importantly, to defend it. Because you can't just go out there with some, you know, inflated valuation and think the public's going to buy into that. So there is, you know, a certain amount of financial terminology that I think is important, not just for equity crowdfunding, but long into the future of your business. Because at the end of the day, your business is going to continuously be bringing in revenue and scaling and maybe going back for additional rounds of funding. And like Elizabeth said, you know, there'll be a whole variety of types of funding, and there'll be financial terminology that you will have to be familiar with to be able to understand what that, you know, what it is you're doing. So I hope that answered your question.
Thanks, Ruth. All right, so now I'm going to turn over to Natalie to ask the second question about financial literacy, and if you want to weigh in on business plans. But there's also another question that I feel like is important that has also come in. And the question is there support for building a business without getting financing or organizations that teach growing without going into debt? And so I think that's a great question, especially since, you know, when you build a business, the last thing you want to do is to get into too much debt when you're just starting right off. So do you have anything to add to that? And then I'll open it up to any of the other panelists who want to add to that specific question as well. So Natalie?
Oh, can you repeat that last question? I just want to make sure I fully digest it. So is there a place that you can go to seek support for your business where you don't have to assume debt for that support?
Yes, so that's the first part of the question. And the second part of the question, is there an organization that teaches growing but without going into debt?
Got it. Okay. So I'll try to answer all of the questions as best I can without repeating too much of what I've already heard, because I think the panelists have done such a fantastic job of covering so many bases. The only thing that I'll add to what you've already heard is two things as it relates to financial literacy. One thing that I always say is the way in which you manage your personal finances is indicative of how you're going to manage your business's finances. And I also find that people are very intrigued by the concept of running a multi-million-dollar business or having $1 million. But if you can manage $1,000, you can manage $1 million. If you can manage $1 million, you can manage $2 million. And part of this is about the growth process of learning how you personally manage finances and how you personally manage just the resources that you have available to you. You can blow $1,000 just as easily as someone can blow $1 million. It will feel just the same. So I think just being mindful of that. And then the second thing I'll say is social capital is something that we haven't really talked a lot about as it relates to financial capital. So much of the angel investment community, the venture capital community is so predicated off of relationships. Who do you know? Who can vouch for you? Who is going to pick up the call to say that they know this person, that you have credibility? That is social capital. Even the ability for you to develop a crowdfunding campaign and ask people to do something on your behalf is in turn utilizing your social capital for the benefit and upliftment of your business. And social capital is the ability for you to take your social relationships and turn them into some form of economic opportunity or gain. And that only happens through trust and through reputation. So just as important as your credit score is in terms of how you manage your finances, so is your social capital score in terms of how you manage your relationships. So I will just add those as two additional components to the financial literacy piece. As it relates to where you can go to support your business, so I think Corinne will smile when she hears me say the Women's Business Centers. She has so eloquently talked about the rich vastness of how the Women's Business Center Network, again, in 135 cities across this country, is supporting thousands of women entrepreneurs and doing so for free. And so many times and for many programs, these are come as you are, walk into the center or join us online in this kind of circumstance and receive assistance. There are very, very, very few programs that you may possibly have to pay for. I also would say that the SBA has a program called Emerging Leaders, which is also a free resource for those who are in the 250,000 or above mark that are interested in being a part of a cohort, going through a structured program. The application process for that particular program, which again is free, is March 31st. So I encourage you to go again to sba.gov to learn more about Emerging Leaders, to find a women's business center in your community. Now, financing, so there was the first question, and then there's kind of like my interpretation of what I feel this person is probably asking, which is, how can I get funded without ever having to pay the funds back? So I will just say, a couple of things. One, I think starting a business with the idea that you're going to receive grants is probably not the most fortuitous way of creating a business. I think that you want to always be thinking about your monetization strategy. How do you actually plan to make money? And so having an initial business grant, if that is something that exists for you, many philanthropic, private sector organizations provide them. There are no kind of direct business grants for a startup circumstance that I'm aware of that the Small Business Administration provides. But you may find something, right? But that can't just be the basis for how your business is going to succeed into perpetuity, right? So you need to develop and hone how you plan to actually make money from your business and to sustain it through revenue, through sales, and through service. And that is important at every phase of your business endeavors and at every phase of its scale and growth. And I honestly feel, to the question about having a business plan, this is something that you should be looking at every year. How can I improve the way in which I'm spending my money and improve the access that I have to receiving additional funds through services and through revenue and through sales for my company? So that would probably be my best answer. I'm sure that's not the answer the person was looking for, But I don't know about a pot of gold that sits under a bridge. But I would just say, to think, if you're thinking about that, the energy that you have there, put that into thinking about how you can monetize your business. And I think that will actually position you better in the long run.
All right, thank you, Natalie. So Corinne, Elizabeth, and Ruth, do you have anything to add to that specific question? And then we'll move on to IP strategies in addition to business plans. So opening it up for one of you if you have anything to add.
I just think Natalie said it so perfectly, because the majority of the calls that we do get right now are businesses that are ideas. They're wanting to start up, they're wanting to build, and they're wanting a grant to do so. And I'm not really sure where the assumption of there's got to be a grant for me to start my business, I don't know where that assumption was born or why it does exist in the minds of so many innovators and really intelligent people, because there aren't those pots of gold under bridges or under rainbows or anywhere that, I haven't stumbled across one either. And so Women's Business Centers sometimes do know about some very small, very specific grants. Sometimes there's training grants, reimbursement grants, but usually a funder is going to want to see some sort of record of performance before they put their dollars there, similar to the way an investor is going to look at a business. So, I just didn't want Natalie's remarks to stand there unechoed, because everything she said was completely right. I've heard of the Anomaly startup grant out there, but it's really the exception and not the rule. And by the way, even though it's the most sought after form of capital, yet truly isn't the most healthy way to get the start.
Can I say something here? Long before there was equity crowdfunding, there was what's called reward-based crowdfunding. And you do not take on any debt with reward-based crowdfunding. Obviously, you have to manufacture the reward and deliver on that part, but the funding takes care of that. And you do not have to have any assets to crowdfund that way. You do not have to go into debt to crowdfund that way. Hundreds of thousands of businesses every month go on platforms like Kickstarter and Indiegogo, and thousands of other platforms actually around the world that do reward-based crowdfunding. And they raise billions of dollars collectively using this type of financing. And, I could sit here and talk for hours about all of the successful companies who then took that money. For example, Oculus Rift, which is the big 3D glasses, was crowdfunded by a 22-year-old on Kickstarter, raised $1.2 million, then went on to raise $40 million of venture capital, and then the next year was bought out by Facebook for over $1 billion. So there are lots of ways to do this outside of the traditional funding mechanisms, if people are interested in learning about that.
All right, thank you, Ruth. So let's change the topic a little bit, and let's talk about marketing yourselves and putting yourself in the best position to qualify for these financial resources. I know we talked a little bit about it, but let's specifically talk about IP, which the USPTO, the United States Patent and Trademark Office, is very interested in. For us, we recognize that intellectual property, meaning patents, trademarks, copyrights, and trade secrets, the ownership of that is very important. And that creating your business strategy also means creating your intellectual property strategy as well. It's also important to have that IP strategy because it can help support your ability to be able to get funding. As a matter of fact, statistics show that patent ownership, or even being able to say that you have a patent pending, increases the likelihood of you getting funding by 70%, and that's a lot. But one of the things that I know our organization hears a lot is that, well, that's great that, getting intellectual property will help me get the funding, but it's also very expensive to be able to get that intellectual property right in the first place, particularly a patent. And so I wanted to spend a couple of minutes just sharing some of the resources that the USPTO has, and then we'll talk about the importance of intellectual property with our panelists with respect to getting and securing funding. So at the USPTO, we have many resources that are available to you. We've partnered with organizations across the country to be able to secure pro bono attorney services. If you are below a certain income threshold, you can secure those services to help you with your patent filing and as well as your trademark filing. With some of the organizations around the country, you can also get copyright and trade secret help as well. And so we've also secured and have relationships with many law schools around the country in which if you don't qualify for pro bono attorney services, you can have a student attorney who is under the supervision of a practicing attorney help you with those services and securing those rights as well. At the USPTO itself, we have many 1-800 numbers or websites and emails that you can ask us questions directly. Our Trademark Assistance Center as well as our Inventor Assistance Center are opportunities for you to reach out to us directly and get your questions answered for things that you are filing with our office. In addition to that, we have also partnered with libraries, over 80 libraries around the country, who are able to help you with your searches to be able to find out, hey, is my invention already out there and patented, or I want to start a new business, I have a new logo, a new brand name. How do I know that someone else has not taken that already? You can do that search using the same systems that the USPTO uses to be able to search our registers to be able to find out that information. And those are really close at hand because those are at your local libraries around the country. All of this information is actually found on our USPTO website. So if you would like to find out more information and get contact information, please feel free to go to uspto.gov and click on Small Inventor Resources, and it'll point you to all the contact information with respect to that. But you can also refer to some of our previous programs that talks about these specific resources in person. You can visit our Women's Entrepreneurship Symposium program page and look at the different events that we have held throughout the month on March 3rd, March 10th, and March 17th, and listen to those particular videos and hear more about those resources as well. So with that in mind, I'm actually going to transition back to Natalie and ask this question. Can you also discuss some of the additional resources beyond what you've already talked about already that the SBA can provide to help our organizations that are listening on this call with some of the different things that they are trying to apply for as they start their business?
Absolutely. And Hope, I also think at the beginning, you kind of mentioned that companies that own some form of intellectual property seem to be more financially viable. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that when investors are looking, they're looking for your competitive advantage. And the fact that you are coming to the table with a patent would potentially preclude someone else from being able to get to market as quickly as you would if you own the patent or if you own the IP around this. And just to kind of talking about what IP is, because it's so vast, right? We're talking about service marks, we're talking about copyrights, we're talking about trademarks, we're talking about patents. I mean, this could be everything from you've built the latest innovation in technology to you have a recipe that you would like to actually you would like to protect the ingredients of for something that you might be selling for your family. And so I think if we share it in that context, I think that people can see both the things that they write on their blogs as things that would be under copyright to what they would produce for someone in a novel and sell off or to provide access to in the same light. And I only say that just because, you know, we have women at every stage of their business on this call. We have women who are sole proprietors who are creating Instagram posts, blog posts, or photographers that could be copywriting their photography. Or we have people who are running multi-million-dollar manufacturing companies that have just innovated in the way in which they are producing whatever it is that they're producing. And I want to speak to both of those. With that being said, again, SBA has a vast network of resources to support entrepreneurs at every level. I'll mention a few additional initiatives in addition to the one for which my office funds, which is the Women's Business Center program, but we have the Service Corps of Retired Executives, which provide one-on-one mentorship and advisement to entrepreneurs who are seeking support for the growth of their companies. We have the Small Business Development Centers, the SBDCs, which are in communities across the country, which provide access to resources, training, scope, and scale for small businesses as well. We have veteran business centers across the nation supporting the growth of veteran businesses. And in this support, baked into that is this intellectual property piece for which this question has been asked. We also have tribal and Native American centers that support our tribal and Native communities and indigenous communities here in the United States of America. And so want to ensure, one, that we're letting folks know that we have a portfolio of centers, a portfolio of programs, and a portfolio of initiatives designed to support you. And you can find out more about all of them by going, again, to sba.gov and finding a center near you.
Thanks, Natalie. I'm going to move to Elizabeth and Ruth next, and then Corinne, I will ask you a specific question that we've gotten as well, in addition to answering these questions. But Elizabeth and Ruth, how often is IP actually brought up in your discussions, and how important do you feel it is to have IP as part of a business owner's portfolio? Does it truly increase the likelihood that you will get funding? And as Natalie said, I mean, it does reduce the risk for the investor. So I would like to think that that makes it more attractive for the investor. So Elizabeth, if you could start off with that.
I think it really depends on the type of business. And it also matters not just that you have IP, but if somebody else has the IP, right? So as an investor, we're often looking for, if you're bringing a new technology or product to market, if somebody else owns that IP, there's a lot of risk, right, in funding your company if you don't kind of have the legal right of way to actually produce and sell that product or technology you're creating. So I think IP is important in understanding what you're actually building, what technologically differentiates you, what your competitive advantage is. Are you able to actually sell and produce what you want to be able to get that financing for? I think I've seen just in my own experience, a lot of women business owners do get, legal sort of threats and orders against their trademarks or different words they've used or different products they sell. And that can be really scary for a business owner when you haven't gone through that before. And I think, lawyers are here to help you, right, understand that, and you can find pro bono resources to understand that. But I think also knowing that these are things that all business owners face at some point in their journey, because, right, IP both protects your business and protects other people's businesses, right? And so I think it is something to think about. It's something to have at top of mind. And I think, of course, if somebody does have a very strong, right, let's say patent portfolio, that's obviously an asset to their business. And as an investor, you're looking for what are the competitive advantages of a business you're investing in? What are the assets that this business owns and can capitalize on? And right, IP is considered an asset in that sense. So especially if you are, a scientific company where you have something super innovative and unique, I would definitely say patent protection is quite valuable.
All right, and Ruth, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes. So what we haven't touched on, which is the other side of your sort of intellectual property, which is your URL securing the right URLs, your Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter branding, all of the branding around social media, email marketing, all of those kinds of things, anything that somebody would Google about you, the principles of the company, all of those things matter in getting funded. And then obviously protecting those things. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with companies where they've already started down this road and they haven't done even those simple basic things, which are free and which take, nothing to do. But they haven't locked those in. And then when they go to set up like a LinkedIn profile for their business, they realize the name has been taken by somebody else. And sometimes they're not even using it. It's just sitting there. So it's really important, in addition to the services that we talked about already, that the trademark patent office offers, these other places where your brand's name resides need to be secured as well.
All right, thank you, Ruth. And Corinne, if you have anything to add to that, please do so. But a couple of questions that came through with respect to businesses and challenges during COVID. And in particular, in 2020, there are many people who have actually lost jobs and their credit was impacted. We talked a lot about the importance of your credit and how that will increase your ability to be able to get funding. But are there solutions or resources for women entrepreneurs who are trying to start a business and they do not have a perfect credit score?
It is so amazing that question's timing, because my answer to the first question ties to this as well. On intellectual property, Ruth Hedges touched on this too with URLs, but pretty much every business is going to have some form of intellectual property at stake. It's the name, it's the logo, it's the URL Ruth mentioned, it's the recipe of the hamburger seasoning, it's the whatever it is, there's always intellectual property at stake. And so having a plan to protect the intellectual property and defend the business against encroachment from others and also claims of encroachment, super important. And I dealt with this in my own small business, which was an advertising agency. We were creating marketing campaigns, we were creating brand identities, and this was a world that I lived in. And so it's very much something that the small business may not be aware that they will someday be affected by, even if they planned not to address it. So and just like Ruth said, failing to plan is planning to fail. I've coined a new phrase, which is plan B is better. Most of the businesses come out with a plan and, that's plan A, and they think plan A is going to be just hugely successful. And then they have to change something. They have to adapt to their environment or the consumer demand or some other unknown circumstance. And they end up sort of feeling like they settled on plan B, but plan B may be the one that's super successful. And so I like to remind people plan B is better. And here's where we are. We're in this pandemic. Small businesses have been challenged. They may be closing. They may have to be reinventing themselves. This is their chance to develop plan B. And plan B is better. Plan B is better because it's better informed. It's more wise. It has a sense of here's why it's so important for me to succeed. And so there's a new motivation and excitement and enthusiasm. And so for the business who's suffered a challenge, who's suffered a setback, it's okay, because plan B is better. And we want to build resiliency into that new plan. And that does include addressing addressing intellectual property. And so it was funny because while Ruth was talking, I did just a quick Google search and I looked up Intellectual Property Women's Business Center just to see who out there in the 135 centers is doing training on this right now. And I found a new women's business center who's partnering with several of the community organizations in their community, is offering a whole series on how to be resilient. And guess what? One of the week's workshops is completely devoted to intellectual property. It's so important as part of that planning process here in this pandemic or not, that the Women's Business Center devoted an entire week to it. And so every women's business center should have some form of support, whether it's counseling or a training workshop that's just sitting there and waiting for you to register.
Thanks, Corrine. And I know it's at the beginning of the hour again, and Natalie actually has another engagement that she needs to jump to. So Natalie, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate the words of wisdom that you have given us for today.
Absolutely. I'm grateful to have been here and to have shared the stage with each of you. Thank you for having me.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Natalie. All right, and so let's move on to another segment, and let's continue to talk about what else business owners can do to set themselves up and place them in the best position to go ahead and get funding. And specifically, without any purpose of stereotyping, how do women-owned businesses differentiate themselves from other businesses to obtain funding? Is owning a business as a woman generally an advantage or disadvantage? And are there niche areas that you suggest women get into that are not seeing a lot of women business participation? And I'm actually going to start with Ruth on this specific question.
I mean, look, women have gotten the short end of the stick in this country on everything. I just read an article the other day that said that women need that 1 in 5 or 20% of women compared to 1 in 3 or 30% of men make investments in the stock market, in anything. Women, that is one way to create wealth. That is one way to create generational wealth. And that is one way to create wealth to invest in a business. If you're not doing any of that over your lifetime, you are losing out on creating that kind of wealth that could help you at some point if you needed to launch a business. I mean, during this pandemic, people had to tap into their 401k plans to get access to capital for their business, to start a business, because they lost their job, and that was the only way that they could build an income, and sell their homes and live in their cars and do all kinds of, really, really sad and bad things. And I wanted to talk about this quote from Vice President Kamala Harris. Just a few weeks ago, she wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post, I believe it was, and she said in February of 2020, 5 million women were business owners. By April, 1 in 4 had closed their doors. About 2.5 million women have lost their jobs or dropped out of the workforce during the pandemic. That's enough to fill 40 football stadiums. This mass exodus of women from the workforce is a national emergency, and it demands a national solution. And that's why we're launching Rise Up crowdfunding, because we are going to focus on women and minorities and veterans and LGBT and all of the diverse communities that have historically been left out of funding. And we're changing the way we look at this, because we have looked at this lopsidedly, which is that we have to go to a funding source. We are the funding source. Crowdfunding is the crowd. The crowd, when they say crowdfunding, it's all of us. So, we're really excited and hopeful to really change this entire process where somebody comes up with an idea and where do they go to get funding, or they feel like they have to go somewhere else to get funding, but they're actually surrounded by funding. They just don't understand the process on how to tap into that funding.
Thanks, Ruth. Elizabeth, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I want to take this at a little bit more of an optimistic angle. So just what we've seen, we've made over 90 investments in the past 5 years, and we've built a portfolio of women-led businesses that's actually performing at the top decile in the industry. There hasn't been in venture capital many firms that have invested in majority women-led businesses. So it's amazing to see the data that even when you do invest in an entire portfolio of women-led businesses, you can actually outperform the market. So as a woman business owner, I think a lot of us, right, take problems we see in our everyday lives and find really unique and inventive solutions to help yourselves and to help others in your communities. And that's part of what you're doing by building this business. And I think that's the power we really have as women, right? As being intuitive, being empathetic, understanding what really needs to happen in our communities and how our businesses can serve them. And so my advice would be, continue on your path, even when it gets hard or there are obstacles, because there's an incredible amount of value that we can create as women and that we should be creating as women, and that can be really, really powerful. Part of the reason that I do what I do is through the investments we've made, there's been over 2,500 new jobs created by these women business leaders. And that's just the start. We're only a few years in, right? But I think when you're a woman business owner, you get to decide the culture of your company. You get to decide if you want, right, to have an inclusive workforce and culture and how you create that within your own company. And I'm really optimistic as we have more women leaders leading these companies that we can actually create a much more equitable and inclusive workforce that will be better for ourselves and future generations. And I think that's really the power you have as a woman business owner. And I'd really, encourage you all to harness it. And even when the days get really, really tough, to just keep pushing and keep going, because what each of you are doing is really important. And, there's a lot of people that are trying to build support systems like ourselves and the other panelists on this call to really support women entrepreneurs and their journey. And we're here for you, and we want you to, win and create the things that you want to do. So I want to just give it a little bit more of an optimistic lens because there is, this new guard of women-led businesses that are thriving and overcoming the obstacles that all of us face. And we just need to be, right, resilient and tenacious, because there needs to be more of us. And when there is more of us, we can do things like reinvest that wealth into, crowdfunding campaigns of other women-led businesses. We can angel invest into other women-led businesses and become investors ourselves as we've created that own wealth within our own businesses. So keep going, and know that your intuition and your unique perspective is really valuable and important.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And so before I move on to Corinne, I wanted to remind everyone to continue to please send your questions in, and we can continue to answer your questions. We have about 10 more minutes, or actually 7 minutes in this particular program. And so please continue to send in your questions. So Corinne, do you have anything else to add to what Elizabeth and Ruth have said?
No, I love what's already been said, and especially the optimism. And Elizabeth is so right. That's where I want to connect, is that there are more women entering the entrepreneurship cycle right now. They're exiting the workforce because they're finding it's not flexible enough. They're looking to have more control over their destiny, and they're looking to take part in the entrepreneurial dream more than ever. And so we are seeing more opportunities for women who are entering into spaces that are traditionally occupied by women and not traditionally occupied by women. You asked what were some of the areas where we're not seeing women. Traditionally, we haven't been seeing very many in the defense contracting space, for example. And really, quite frankly, federal contracting is still one of the areas that there's so much opportunity. There are set-asides for women businesses. Going through the SBA's program to be certified as a woman-owned small business is just one step of the process. There are other opportunities out there as well to be a subcontractor before ever becoming a prime. But I wouldn't necessarily go after an industry just because there aren't a lot of women in it. I think if that's where the drive is and that's where the talent is, then that's where you should go. But we are seeing more and more women occupy those areas, and that's exciting. Hope, I think you're on mute.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Corinne. Let's move on to a couple of success stories. And I think success stories are things that all of you have experienced. And so we're going to actually start with you, Corinne. What are some of the success stories that you can share, and what do you think made their funding story a particular success?
Yeah, so I spent, in preparing for this panel today, preparing for all of you, I looked through literally hundreds of success stories because I wanted to find the right one that I thought spoke to all of the greatest strengths of this panel and the messages today. And I found the perfect one. And you can actually see their website and see that they're in the middle, Ruth, of a crowdfunding campaign right now. It's an equity crowdfunding campaign, and the company is called Naboso. N like Nancy, A, B like boy, O, S like Sam, O.com, Naboso. Naboso was started by a woman who was inspired by her drive to be healthy, her travels, and understanding that stimulating our bodies is what stimulates our nervous system, can make us healthier. And so she created these really exciting, how to describe it, like a bumpy texture to an insole in your shoe, or a bumpy texture on a floor mat or a floor tile. Standing on those makes you stand taller. It corrects your posture. She has all kinds of blogs and all kinds of studies out there about how it can help with neuropathy, with children. It helps them with their brain, signals and learning to walk. It can help with therapy, recovering from an injury. It can help with athletes. There are all types of different textures and things to try. So here we are, a woman who's got something that's registered with your office, that she's designed the product, she's launched it. And just like Elizabeth mentioned earlier, typically the business owner is going to cycle through many forms of capital. That's exactly what Dr. Emily did when she started out her business. She bootstrapped it. She got money from family. She did everything that it took to scrape money in, borrowed money. She got the EIDL loan from SBA, the forgivable loan. And now she's in a live crowdfunding campaign. And so you can actually go to her website. And if you just wanted to see what one looks like and see some of the things that have been referenced today, like valuations, et cetera, you can actually go through her website and click at the very top banner where it says invest it in the future of movement. And I'm not suggesting that you necessarily invest, but you just scroll down and see, like, how does she market herself? How does she tell her story? How does she talk about what the investment perks are? How many shares did she sell? Then she weaves in product messages, and she goes into the history and talks about the successes and how much her company has grown. She's up 68% growth in revenue. And so I just think she's got a really colorful, appealing, and a success story you can walk away with and say, that's what a woman-owned business who went to a women's business center has walked away with, a really smart crowdfunding campaign who's obviously super successful.
Thanks, Corinne. And my mom would be very proud for me to be able to stand tall when I wear those shoes. She's always telling me to have good posture. So over to you, Ruth. Do you have any success stories that you can share with our audience today?
Yeah, so I have a really great one. It's a Hispanic female founder. Her name is Liza Velarde. She created a company called Dali, and they raised more than $1 million using equity crowdfunding under Regulation CF to improve cancer detection. Dali developed a device called CytoCatch. It enables doctors to monitor cancer cells in their patients. The device finds and displays tumor cells, which gives oncologists a more complete image of the tumor and its possible mutations. This technology makes diagnosis and personalized therapy possible and assists with the effectiveness of early treatment. So, a lot of people's perception of crowdfunding has come from either the GoFundMe world, where a lot of people use it for emergencies or crisis, or the Boston bombing, Katrina, you name it, people go to GoFundMe, or they are familiar with the reward base, which is Kickstarter and Indiegogo, but they don't realize that now with equity crowdfunding, as of last week, women and men can raise up to $5 million using Regulation CF and up to $75 million using Reg A+. So very sophisticated companies with great IP, for example, can now go onto these platforms and raise serious money to help advance their medical devices, their technology, a franchise, larger, more established operations that they may have historically had to go to a bank for a loan or a VC or an angel. So we're really excited about the future of equity crowdfunding, especially for women and minorities, because the world is their oyster. I mean, this is a process. If you do the work, you have a much greater chance of raising the money.
Thank you, Ruth. And Elizabeth, you get to round us out as we are at the end of our program. So if you wouldn't mind sharing the success story and any last words that you might possibly have.
Amazing. I'd love to share a success story kind of building off of Ruth and individuals serving the cancer community. We have a company in our portfolio called Cherry Blossom Intimates. It was founded by two Black women, Dr. Regina Hampton, who was one of the first Black women to actually have her own surgical center. She's a breast cancer surgeon, and Jasmine Jones, who she was actually Miss DC. And the two of them have created this incredibly innovative company that serves women breast cancer survivors. So they are able to create 3D printed prosthetics for breast cancer survivors in 36 different skin tones and colors. Before, traditionally prosthetics are only come in 2 colors, which obviously don't fit the wide range of individuals that are dealing with breast cancer. And they're able to use 3D scanning technology to actually scan an individual's chest wall and create a prosthetic that looks like, your body, your skin tone, even, freckles, veins, anything that makes you feel, you've lost a part of yourself. And this helps you feel whole again. And these prosthetics are actually covered by insurance. And as a breast cancer survivor, you're also able to get special bras that promote healing and don't have, things like wires and whatnot that could actually re-exacerbate, the cancer growth in your body. So they're also able to provide, specialized bras that fit all sizes of women, because also a lot of traditional providers of these only have a very specific size range that doesn't, fit the entire range of women. So they have built this incredibly inclusive, tech-enabled company to serve breast cancer survivors. And they actually started as a single store in Maryland, right outside of DC, where there's the largest prevalence of breast cancer in the country. And they started as this retail model, and they actually were able to get a small business bank loan to start their company after they had been bootstrapping it. And when we met the two founders, we said, this is bigger than just, the city and Maryland and community you're serving. Women all over the country and perhaps the world could really benefit from this technology. How can we use technology to actually scale this into $1 billion business where women from the comfort of their homes, can get these prosthetics and bras and services they need as part of their healthcare services? And so we invested as a venture capital firm. We also utilized our angel investing community, Fempire, to get many aligned women angel investors as investors into the company as well. We helped facilitate an introduction to one of the top business accelerators in the country, Techstars, for the company Cherry Blossom Intimates to go through the Techstars Accelerator program and also receive an investment there. And after that, they actually raised a $1.2 million venture capital round, which, there have not even been 100 Black women in the US in all of history that have raised over $1 million of venture capital. And that's just, a terrible statistic that I'm working on changing every day. But we're really proud of this company being able to close, the $1.2 million venture funding round. And I'm sure in their future, they may do something like crowdfunding, purchase order funding. We actually helped them make a connection to Macy's and their supplier diversity program, which is really awesome that they do as a retailer to get new brands into their stores built by women and minorities who may not be suppliers into big retail before. So they're launching also their first retail line in Macy's, which is really exciting. And I think that's just such a great story of how by building a business that serves a really huge need that wasn't being served before and doing it in a way that actually serves all women can be both powerful from a business perspective, but also an impact perspective.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you so much to Ruth as well as Corrine. It has been wonderful to serve as the moderator for this program and to hear your wonderful words of wisdom. Sean, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Hope, for leading today's discussion, and our panelists Ruth, Corinne, Natalie, and Elizabeth. Thank you for providing us with your experience, the insight you have, and all of the resources you gave us. We have so much to work with now. I'd also like to thank all of our virtual attendees for spending your time with us today. I hope you'll be joining us for our final WES program, Wednesday, March 31st, Lessons from Successful Women, Entrepreneurs, who will be sharing their insight and best practices for business during this climate. For links or more information about how to register for a program, you can register at our website, uspto.gov/events. While you're on our events page, I encourage you to check out many other free virtual intellectual property education and awareness programs that are available to you. 2 of those programs coming up, one today at 5 to 6 p.m. is our Wine and IP Women's History in the Wine Industry, and on April 1st at noon to 1 p.m., the NCEAI Innovation Chat, Creating Innovators. You'll be receiving a short survey for today's program, so we hope that you complete it. We do value your feedback. Your input is important in creating future programs to meet the needs of our customers. So we look forward to hearing from you and getting a response to those surveys with your information and what you'd like to see us do in the future. Thank you again for attending today's program. We look forward to seeing you next week at our final program. Have a great day.